I was just reviewing your LinkedIn profile and I noticed you've transitioned cross functionally.
I transitioned quite a number of times throughout the years. I discovered my deep desire and passion to work on the human resources part of the organization. And of course, at the time, nobody wanted to really hire me. I did have zero relevant HR experience whatsoever. Nobody in HR gave me any cookie points for the 6 years that I had spent in the other function called sales. So I had to prove myself, I had to earn my stripes. So it was a steeper learning curve. I made it extra hard for myself because in those 26 years, I never repeated the industry.
Any transition, but if we specifically focus at C-suite executives, they're really pivotal moments. It can define the direction the organization takes. What makes it so consequential?
There is something quite revealing about these transitions, which is it's either of the two cases. Either they go horribly wrong, which we know from research, it's about 40% of the time, or somehow they work out and it's about 60% of the time.
Hi, I'm your host, Reena Suri, and welcome to Thriving Changes. What does it really take to step into an executive role and succeed when the stakes couldn't be higher? Because the truth is, most executive transitions don't fail because leaders lack capability. They fail because of what leaders don't see coming. In today's episode of Thriving Changes, we are unpacking exactly that with Navid Nazemian. Let's dive in. Hi, Navid.
Hello, Reena.
How are you?
Very well.
Welcome to Thriving Changes.
Thank you very much. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you today.
Same here. I'm looking forward to it. So, how we do it is that I'll invite you to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. Sounds great.
So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Good. So, I spent 26 years of my wonderful life working for 7 large multinational type organizations. The last 20 of those 26, I spent working in the great function of human resources. And in the year 22, my book launched, and it was an unexpected surprise, an unexpected success. And in a way, it put me in a position where I had to make a choice, which is, do I want to continue my executive career, or do I want to do what I had been doing on the side, always with permission from my employers, to do more full time? And that was the coaching and the writing. And I decided for the latter. And that was almost exactly 4 years ago.
Okay. So now you're a full-time coach.
Correct. Yes.
And of course, you've come out with one book and you're planning another. Are you writing another one?
I am not planning another book in the foreseeable future, but I do write every week, and I have a newsletter on the same. So it's thought leadership, and I have a large following on LinkedIn. So that's what I have dedicated myself to.
All right. Sounds good. You did mention that you worked with quite a few multinationals. I was just reviewing your LinkedIn profile and I noticed you've transitioned cross functionally as well.
That's right. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And
yeah.
Tell us a little bit what that journey was like. It's a very interesting topic for me because I hear so often that you need to focus on a niche, stay in your lane. So moving between functions, it's really intriguing to me and how people manage to do it. And if we can break the myth in any way.
Of course. It's funny because I transitioned quite a number of times throughout the years. So the first one, or one of the first transitions, was when I moved to Germany as a child. I was 13 at the time. I did not speak a single word of German. And despite that, my parents decided that's going to be my new destination. So that was an interesting cultural transition that I had to go through. But then I spent 6 years working in the wonderful function of sales. I was pretty good at it. And despite that, I discovered my deep desire and passion to work on the human resources part of the organization. And of course, at the time, Rena, nobody wanted to really hire me. I was in Germany. It was very much a black and white case. I did have zero relevant HR experience whatsoever. So every time I applied for an assistant HR role or an entry level HR role, like a junior HR role, if they were kind enough, they would just give me a call and say, "Hey, I think you have applied for the wrong position. We got great sales opportunities for you." And as they say, it takes one individual, one opportunity to really break into that. And that was my boss at the time with Adidas, who said, "Okay, fine. You know what? You're not my typical HR kind of person that I would normally hire, but I have a team full of HR experts, and I am happy to take a risk on you." And so that was the first time I transitioned from 6 years sales background into a human resources function. And Rena, allow me also by saying that nobody in HR gave me any cookie points for the 6 years that I had spent in the other function called sales. So I had to prove myself, I had to earn my stripes, as we used to say at the time, right from day one in HR, as if I had spent a couple of years working in the HR function. So it was a steeper learning curve. And what was interesting about the transitions that followed that were twofold. One, I got to work and live in 5 countries. So again, that's another kind of transition interculturally speaking. But more importantly, what I did is I made it extra hard for myself, because in those 26 years, I never repeated the industry. So I transitioned from one industry to another, and I did it 7 times in those 26 years. And that really was another learning that I had, which is there are always some industry specific things you pick up. And that being said, there are always some things you can cross over and transfer into an existing one and into a new industry. And so that's been my journey. Is if I were to describe it in one word, it would probably be transition.
Then after that, of course, you've transitioned. You were in HR for so many
20
years.
years. Yeah.
Yes, 20 years. And now you have been coaching executives, C-suite executives for the last how many years?
14 years in total.
Wow. All right. So tell us a little bit. So you've compiled all that into the book, your learnings from those 14 years. And what's the book called?
Yes. So the book is called Mastering Executive Transitions, The Definitive Guide. And unlike many other authors, Rena, I didn't think of my own experience to be good enough to fit into a book. Of course, I also relate to that. But what I have done is to do the deep research underground, both in a theoretical and in a practical way, meaning I've been interviewing 20 C-suite executives myself. And on top, I've used research that was widely available to me at the time. And so I really didn't want to write a book just based on my own little experience, but I wanted to write a book that becomes the guide for the topic of executive transitions. And this is one of the reasons why I think that the book is doing so great, because it's not just my autobiography. This is how I did it. And good luck. Go and try and copy paste it into your executive career, and hopefully it's going to work for you too.
I really like that idea because you're really being the coach here. It's not just your perspective, but you're really leaning into other people's perspectives, their views on it. And it's always so much more richer to get those perspectives and then have that conversation, so to say, because we just learn every day from other people, from our conversations. So let me start with this. Any transition, but if we specifically focus it at C-suite like executives, they are really pivotal moments. It can define the direction the organization takes, and of course, the teams. What makes it so consequential?
Yes, yes. As you said rightly, Rena, there is something quite revealing about these transitions, which is it's either of the two cases. Either they go horribly wrong, which we know from research, it's about 40% of the time, or somehow they work out and it's about 60% of the time. But for me, the big question was always, how can we reduce the 40% to something close to zero? And how can we improve the 60% to something that is much bigger than that? And that was the core question that I set out to establish. And it's one of the reasons it took me 7 years to finish this book from start to finish, because I spent roughly 5 years just doing the research, just reading, just trying to catalyze information, trying to disseminate sometimes contradicting evidence that is available out there, and to then also sense check it with my own lens, with my own experience of working in the HR function for those many organizations, and also double and triple check with those C-suite leaders that I interviewed for the book. So it really has come together in a nice way. And of course, this is one of the reasons I'm not looking to write another book. I'm not sure I have enough life left in me to produce a second and a third book. Yeah.
You look pretty young, so never say no.
Right.
Let's look at the number. You said like 40% of them can go wrong,
Yeah.
right? What are some typical patterns that you see in when they go wrong? Where do executives or leaders get it wrong
Yeah.
in taking
Yeah.
up a new role?
This is one of the chapters in my book. It dissects the top 10 reasons for executive transition failure. But if I wanted to sum it up for you and for your listeners, Rina, as I say it very often these days, it's the functional or technical skills that gets you promoted and hired into the C-suite. And it's the lack of soft skills that gets you fired pretty quickly after that. So if you look at the top 10 reasons for executive transition failure, and if you were to group those top 10 into three main buckets, it boils down to people, culture, and or politics. And so it's not the case that you have just been promoted from a finance director position into a CFO position, and you're really not good with the numbers. Or it's unlikely that if you were an HR director before, now you're the chief people officer, but you're really not sure how to go about translating the corporate strategy and the targets into the people agenda. But it's the lack of the soft skills that often gets in the way. And there are many more reasons for transition failure. One of the reasons is, unfortunately, that past success just does not guarantee future successes. And so whether you have been successful previously or not, that doesn't guarantee anything about your upcoming transition. As my mentor and friend, Dr. Marshall Goldsmith, puts it, what got you here won't get you there. And I think there's something quite telling about that very catchy phrase and the title of one of his international best-selling books that we really ought to look into if we are at that executive level, and we really ought to think about, because it's human nature, Rina. This is really what I have observed over the 20 plus years I've spent in the corporate life, which is we tend to take out the old success playbook and to try to repeat the same thing over and over again. And sometimes it does work out to our favor and sometimes it doesn't. And my kind of belief is the higher you go up, the less likely you are that whatever playbook you have learned and experienced is going to really serve you well in that new position. So what I do sometimes with newly appointed executives is to use two different tools right at the outset. One of them is, I call them the 5 C's. So these are, I'm sure many of your audience would know what makes a great diamond, the 4 C's or 5 C's of what makes an outstanding diamond, which is color, clarity, cut, certification, and carat compared to weight. But what I mean with the 5 C's in my double diamond framework are things like context, culture, commitment, circles, and confidence. And what I do with the executive is to have them sit down in their own time and reflect on how's the new context of my new role, sometimes in the new organization, different than the context of the role that I was promoted from. How's the culture of this new position, this new level of leadership, maybe this new organization, different when it comes to the organization, when it comes to its leadership, when it comes to its values, or guided beliefs than what I used to know to be true previously. And so whilst we go through those 5 C's and I get them to do their homework on their own and then they come prepared to the session, we really have a conversation around all the pitfalls that they might fall into, because if they just take the old playbook and just try to play it all over again, it's unlikely going to help them. So that's one of the exercises. And then the second one is I share with them a study. And that study was conducted by Development Dimensions International, DDI. They are a thought leadership house like CCL and INSEAD and London Business School and many others. And what they have done is, this particular study is called Leaders in Transition study. And what they have done, Rina, is they have mapped out in colors how much time, what is the mix of skills and activities that you ought to demonstrate at the entry to mid-level leadership positions, at the senior level positions, and at the executive level. And if you were to look at it just as a half circle kind of colored chart, it really looks different every time you make those transitions into a high level of leadership. And again, what I then get to spend time with the executive on is, okay, Rina, if you were my coaching client, how's the new mix of skills and activities you ought to demonstrate in your new position different than the one that you were just promoted from? And those are some of the ideas I wanted to share with you and the audience around how we prepare the leader for what's coming their way.
Okay, so let's talk about those. Can you elaborate a little more?
Sure, yes. Allow me by using my own little example here. So at Vodafone, I was the global head of HR. I partnered with our group CFO and her finance leadership team. And so ultimately, I looked after 27,000 employees in 24 markets. In that logic of the DDI chart, I would be the middle layer, the senior leadership. I was not part of the C-suite yet. And if you look at the colors, 2 of those segments of that half circle, orange and yellow are the colors, make up roughly 2/3 of the time I typically spend as a senior leader of the company size Vodafone. Meaning, one of them is getting work done through others, because although I'm an ambitious guy, I couldn't possibly partner with 27,000 employees. So I have layers and layers of HR leaders and shared service center colleagues who front face most of those 27,000 individuals from an HR perspective. And the second activity I spent a lot of time in were to engage and inspire employees. Finance function is all about numbers, and HR function is all about people. And hopefully there's a way where you can marry up the two. So let's assume that's roughly how I spend 2/3 of my time, 3 out of the 5 working days a week on those just 2 activities. Now imagine if Vodafone were to promote me to become the chief people officer. By the way, that's not what they did. So they didn't do that, but imagine for a minute if I were to be appointed into that position. That number, 27,000, moves into 101,000 now. So I suddenly have a much wider scope. And if you're then to look at the same study that DDI conducted, you would have to use a lens to find the yellow and orange in the new half circle. Because suddenly I have 3 new activities that roughly take up 2/3 of my time. The first one is managing high-risk decisions. Do we go and implement SAP HR SuccessFactors as a global employee function? Or do we go down the route of Oracle HR or Workday? Any one of these 2 or 3 decisions can actually cost me my job if I put my money on the wrong solution here. So managing high-risk decisions, and by the way, the buck stops at my level. There's nobody more senior than I am in the HR function in that position. It's something I need to spend time and energy thinking more deeply about. The second activity is navigating organizational politics. Now, I'm sure nobody likes to admit that this thing called politics exists in their company. It's always someone else's problem, some competitor company's issue. The reality is politics exists in every single company. And so whether I like to admit it or not is a different matter, but I have to be able to navigate those politics. And the third activity that makes up the 2/3 of my new time is representing the corporate line. My name is Elon Musk. I'm at a private dinner and I, for some reason, have a go at the waiter. Guess what? I will never be a private person because I am a senior executive that is known by many people on this planet. And so, whether I am in my private capacity or in my profession, it doesn't matter. I always will have to represent the corporate line. Now, you see how it's still the same person. Arguably, if I were good enough as a global head of HR, that would have earned me the promotion to become chief people officer. But you see how suddenly my entire focus, time, and energy, or in other words, the mix of skills and activities needs to completely shift from what I used to do to what I now need to pay attention and start to demonstrate. So that's just one little demonstration of how things will shift when you step up to the C-suite.
It can be so consequential at that time, making those decisions, as you said, when they are navigating, when they're taking those high risk decisions. What maybe a couple of things that the leader can do to get it right or to make sure that they have eliminated everything else and they know that this is the way forward? Uh,
Yes. So that little question of yours, Rena, took me about a year to respond to. And that then became what I call the double diamond framework, of which I only shared this little example with the 5 C's. So if you think of the double diamond, this is, you have to imagine two diamonds facing one another. It's a 7 phase framework, meaning despite common belief, I actually loved reading that book myself. Back in the year 2008, it's called The First 90 Days. And I was just hooked by the idea that, hey, all you need to do is to sit on your hands idly, wait until day one, start to run like crazy, and be done after 90 days. Although I loved the simplicity of it, the reality is it is nowhere near sufficient at the executive level, which is also very visible if people were to pay attention to the previous subtitle of the same book, which the author elegantly put away a couple of editions ago. It said, critical onboarding strategies for leaders at all levels. Now, I don't know about you, Rena, but I have worked in the HR function for too long to know that if someone is written for any leader at any level, it clearly is not fit for the top level leadership. And so, in my mind, onboarding is just one out of the 7 phases of a successful transition, which is why I dedicated the 2nd phase of the 7 phase framework to just the first 90 days. So you see already it's only one out of 7 phases. So it is very clear that it's nowhere near sufficient for the executive level transitioning. Now, I would like to go back to phase 1. I call this phase Discover, and why it's an underutilized resource for executive leaders. Your question was, what can they do to transition more successfully? And this is one of the answers. The first one is make sure you settle for a framework like the double diamond if you're working at the top of your house, because any first 90, 100, or 120 day approach is not going to give you what you need. But more importantly, and this is so sad because I know the gentleman, his name is Michael Burrows, and he used to be a senior search firm partner with one of the largest search firms in the world. And he wrote this amazing book called Before Onboarding, critical strategies to apply before you start in a new critical position. And the idea that he had was so brilliant, but for whatever reason, his book never became as successful as the first 90 days, was that there are many concrete things that you can do as the incoming executive leader. You may not be technically in your role yet, which is why I called this phase Discover. It's the first of the 7 phases. And the time clock on that phase means anywhere from day minus 90 to day 0 is phase 1. And so let's assume, Rena, you are the incoming chief editor of this magazine called Vogue. You know that there is someone iconic in the role, but that lady has been earmarked to retire, let's say, by the 1st of May. That roughly gives you 4 weeks between now and the 1st of May. Today is the 23rd of March. You could sit idly on your hands, wait until day one, and start running like crazy, as the first 90 days is suggesting. Or you could do one or many of these things. One, as soon as you've been announced as the incoming chief editor, you can reach out to your predecessor and arrange a meeting of some kind, a call if you're not even in the country, to get her idea around what the role is all about, what does success look like in her own opinion, because she has obviously been there for a lot longer than you have. The second thing you could do is to reach out to your future boss, which is more likely to be the chair of the board of directors or some investor or someone who this role reports into, because it's already the group CEO type position, the chief editor role. The third thing you could do, with permission from your predecessor, you could start to establish a relationship with the leadership team members that you are going to inherit. Why sitting idly and waiting until they want to then introduce yourself? If there are things you can do right now to give yourself a heads up, to give your team a heads up around who is coming in, and what is it like to be in a conversation with Rina, and what does Rina appreciate, and what does she really dislike. These are all the things you could start to put into motion. And so again, it's beyond me why anyone would want to wait until day one to then start running like crazy and then stop running after 90 days, hoping that they are done with the onboarding. So this is just one more angle I wanted to provide, which is you can look at this double diamond framework and really think about it phase by phase. What are typical activities I need to start to think about during this phase? And so it's 7 phases you will follow. The other aspect of the double diamond framework I want to share with you is, and this is why I love the idea of, or the analogy that the diamond will give you, because if you look at the diamond from the side, either you're diverging or converging, meaning particularly during the first 3 or 4 phases, you as the incoming chief editor of the Vogue magazine, you will need to collect a lot of data points. You need to immerse yourself into the magazine, its long heritage, what it really stands for, what about the competitor product, how is this one different than the rest, and so on. But at some point, Rina, you ought to stop collecting those dots and to start to converge them. So you need to start thinking about, okay, I've collected all these various data points. What are my 2 or 3 big bets based on everything I've heard, based on everything I've read, based on everything I've analyzed? What are my 2 or 3 big bets I want to put my money, energy, and motivation and gather the entire troops behind those 2 or 3 things? Because I'm convinced now that those are the top 2 or 3 things I need to spend time and attention and energy on so that I am able to go into this transition. And allow me to add one more thing to the double diamond framework, and then I will stop
No,
talking.
please take your time.
Yes, that one is the upper half of the double diamond, which is 2 half circles going around, making it a full circle. That one says optimizing the energy levels of the executive leader. Rina, I have seen that over and over again, where the new executive leader is burning the midnight oil in the new corner office because they have so much to consume. They have such a big pressure on their shoulders. There's so many expectations coming their way. The teams are expecting things of them. Their boss is expecting things of them. The shareholders want this. The analysts want that. And by the way, not all of these stakeholder groups want the same thing. Otherwise, it will be too easy. And so all they do then, almost as a reflex, as a response to all that pressure that's coming their way, they just keep adding and adding more hours to the workday, which means that a week or 2 or 3 or 4 into the new role, they're unlikely to be mentally at the very best, because all they do is to get 3 to 4 hours of sleep every night, hoping that more time is going to solve it for them. Whereas the reality is, and this is the work of a gentleman called Tony Schwartz that I have baked into the Double Diamond Framework. He wrote a very popular article on Harvard Business Review a few years ago that said, manage your energy, not your time. And his idea is that time is a finite resource, and there's only so many hours you can give to anything, really. But energy is where your focus should be. So if you nourish and replenish your energy levels, you actually are going to get more out of it than burning the midnight oil, as many executives do, and just adding more and more time to the workday and cutting down on their sleep and all the various other social activities that we all need because we are social creatures at the end
Yeah.
of the day.
Yeah, I know. And we need to somewhere blow off our steam at some point at the end of the week. Just take whatever it is that you enjoy. There was another gentleman that he said it is without fail, he enjoys golfing. He says, I need to put in somewhere those 2 hours in my calendar that I go and hit some balls that take off because it fuels me. I get ideas out. All that energy that you're talking about it comes from there because he enjoys it so much and he needs it. He says that it's non negotiable for me that I need to put in at least 2 hours on a Saturday or a Sunday or a Friday afternoon to get those because then I am a better executive the following week.
Yes?
And
Yeah.
so what you're saying is so important. So if we have to contrast between a failed executive transfer, that what does it cost to the company and to the stakeholders to when they get it right? So if we do a comparison, what does it look like?
When I landed my very first HR role, my job title was assistant HR manager. And this was actually the very first project I was assigned to take on. And it was around attrition and what is the cost of attrition to our organization. And I worked with a number of colleagues and I did a number of interviews. I did my own research at the time. And I realized, Rena, and established the data in a way that attrition roughly costs 2.5 times the employee's salary. So let's say if you were to hire yourself an assistant, let's just assume, and you and I are colleagues, and I got my own assistant, you got your own assistant, and yours, for whatever reason, is not performing. So you are always late to meetings or going to the wrong meetings or sat on the wrong planes or not having hotels booked and what have you, what admins typically do. At some point, you are likely to sit down with the individual and do what we call performance improvement plans to say, look, I expect these things to be in order. These are the instances where they were not taken care of. This is what I expect an assistant to do on my behalf. And so I want to work with you very closely to make it work. Let's assume you do all of that, and despite that, nothing is moving. This individual, for whatever reason, is just not a competent admin. Full stop. At some point, you will have to pull the trigger and say, you know what? Let's call him Joe. Joe, this is it. I think I've really done my utmost to help you get back on track. You and I are not going to be a great match and a team, and this is why I have to sadly say goodbye to you. Now, Joe has still 2 weeks of annual holiday left and has various other things, so it's another month or so until Joe leaves the company. Now you are in a bit of a desperation mode, so you go to your HR person and say, I need a new Joe this time, please. Can we make sure he or she is really up for the job? And of course, HR will spend time to try to find you someone. In all these weeks where HR is busy trying to find you a new admin, my admin kindly offers to help out because she's just this kind person. And I like you and I like working with you. That's why I have no issues against using my admin for your purposes. Which also means two things. One is my admin is now suddenly under a lot more pressure than before because she used to serve one executive, now suddenly she's serving two. And let's face it, neither you and I are getting the best of her because she's suddenly dividing her total time among two execs, and before it was just one. So I cannot expect the same level of service, nor can you, right? which means that she will now go and speak to one of her peers to say, I really want to call on your support because Rena is going on her world tour and it's such a complex journey. I could not possibly do that on the side. I now need your help. So that starts to spread. So your admin is out of the door. He clearly wasn't any good. HR is taking its time, and the new admin is only going to join in 4 or 6 weeks from now. If you add all the cost of failure, the cost of hiring a new admin, the cost of the handover that Joe never bothered to give to the new person because he's already out of the door, and let's face it, he wasn't really of good use to anyone, including yourself. That all adds up to roughly 2.5 times the salary that Joe cost you and the company. Now, at the executive level, Rena, it's a whole different story because you can assume that if you're the group chief executive of a large multinational organization, if you're the kind of person that Joe was, you will destroy a lot of value in the organization. So the number that is researched for the largest 1,000 US companies on average is $56 million. So if you have a non-performing CEO that is coming into a position for whatever reason is not really making great strides, he or she is going to cost the company $56 million. And so the formula that I use in my book is anywhere between 10 to 30 times the executive salary is the downward risk we look at for an executive that is not having a successful transition.
Wow. And if it goes right?
The upsides are enormous. And this is what I loved about working for Vodafone. We used to have what I call the do nothing scenario and the best case scenario. And so they always had to be presented by the commercial leaders to the finance leaders so that they could make the ultimate decision on behalf of the organization. And so if you look at what's really the upside for the organization, if the company were to get this right, at several fronts, the benefits. One is you have obviously benefits at the individual level. If you are the incoming executive and you're having a great time and the company looks after you and you are able to give whatever you want to, that really sets you up for a trajectory of success. If you then look at the organization, we'll be happy because you're a key influencer in the organization. You're someone of the highest position and authority. That means all of that is going to trickle down into your leadership team and leadership teams of teams. And also at the stakeholder level, if they have made the right choice, of course, they will be happy because the shareholders, the analysts, and all the other various stakeholder groups will also be happy with that appointment. And so you can actually translate that into hard numbers. And just to give some of those numbers away, if the executive is transitioning successfully, they have a 90% likelihood to meet their own performance objectives. So do the leadership team for the next 3 years to come. If you look at it just commercially, between flat or declining revenue growth, this is the bottom quartile of those that are not doing anything for their leader and actually hope that they're going to make it somehow, between the best companies and what they do for those leaders. They have 2.5 times the revenue growth and twice the increase in profit margins. So you can look at it from attrition, you can look at it from a replacement cost, you can look at it at meeting targets. There are very many benefits to had if the company were to pull some of the levers I shared, and one which we haven't touched upon, and I wanted this to be the last one, is to bring in a specialized transition coach, someone who's been there and done that successfully with many executives before, and someone who can help and guide the executive leader in transition.
That actually was my next question. Is it a trend for companies to offer this support to the incoming executive, or is it something that they leave to chance?
I have to be a little careful what I say here. So let's say it's quite common for forward-thinking organizations and HR leaders to support their executives in transition. I will not use the name of the actual company, but the company I'm citing here is one of the largest or the largest luxury company in the world. And they have something like 220,000 employees worldwide, of which 950 are the top level executives. Now, Out of those 950, any given year, Rena, 30 to 50 will be moving into a new transition, a new position. The GM of this maison will move into this other brand. And so that's a transition in its own right. And so because of that, they have done several things. One of them is they have sent me 10 of their existing coaches to be trained up by me on my methodology that I just started describing to you, meaning they become what I call certified transition coaches. So they all have great knowledge of the framework and are able to apply it. The second thing they've done is to sit down with myself and two of the other coaches and with the HR person in-house to co-create what they call the transition program, meaning the same executives, the 30 to 50 a year that are going through a new career transition, are invited in person to that 3-day in-person event, to the global facility. And they are getting, again, support in those 3 days. And on top, what they are doing is they're bringing me and many of the coaches that sent me to be trained by me to work with those executives in transition as their transition coach. So this is just one little example, but there are many such examples I can share where organizations are proactive. They are seeing this as a small little investment compared to the huge downside cost that can come your way if you just leave it to luck and hope that somehow they are magically going to thrive and survive in the new position. And so this is just one of the ideas I wanted to share with you, which is there are great examples out there of organizations that are forward-looking, proactive, looking at this as an investment and not necessarily as a cost.
That makes so much sense because we've gone through those numbers and it would only be a repetition that the downside of it can 56 million is a big number depending on the of course the size of the organization
Yeah.
and what's at cost. Is there a difference when we see a large number of male executives getting promoted? Do female executives also get a similar kind of support when they're transitioning?
Yeah, Rena, that is a great question and one that I couldn't believe when I got my hands on this particular study. It just so happens it's also from DDI and it was published in 21 and it's called the Executive Transition Study. And it's interesting because the focus of the study was not to come up with female-male support or looking at is there any difference, but it was really looking at, okay, what are companies doing? How are they supporting their executives in transition? And as every good study should, they said at the outset, they asked their participants to identify their gender if they feel comfortable to do that, to identify their level of seniority in the company if they feel comfortable to do that, their industry, and so on. And what they found out is that female executives are anywhere between 13 to 22 percentage points less likely to get the same support that their male counterparts are getting, which is shocking. And because I really wanted badly to also take this study and put it into my book, this is when my publisher sent me a very legally worded letter to say, any more delay and you're looking at this much of a compensation due to us. But this was the last one I really wanted to get my hands on, and I did. I'm glad I did. And so the 3 items were, what is the percentage of male versus female leaders who receive leadership skills training specific to the transition? Let's say if you have been a finance director for most of your career and now you get your GM role, there are really courses out there that can help you to prepare become a general manager. The second item was, how many of those executives were formally assessed and provided with the results of the assessment and some coaching guidance on the back end of that? And the third item was, how many of those females and male executives were assigned a formal mentor or a transition coach? And depending on what item you look at, it was 13, 19, or 22% less likely for a female exec to get the same support that the male counterparts get. And so again, for me, it's not to sit here and judge and say, oh, these organizations, why are they doing this and so on, but to give an idea out, which is there's one step where you can eliminate any and all gender bias in executive transition support, which is what this large luxury company did. They define the executive level as per the seniority position, VP or EVP, whatever the level is. And anyone who steps up to that level will get this support. And so by doing that one intervention, you will eliminate any and all bias towards or against a particular gender.
Yeah, that's a great point that you brought up, because there are so many conversations about the salary discrimination as well between female and male executives, that invariably female executives earn much less than male executives. If there is a leader listening to us who is either about to take on a transition journey or is in the midst of it or newly into it, what would be that one piece of advice that you would like to share?
I would say invest in professional and qualified support. And maybe a good starting point is just to listen to the book or download it and buy it and read it. But really, that is my key advice, that there are people like myself, many more. I've trained up 59 certified transition coaches. So together, there's 60 people of us who could help that level of leadership and that organization as well. And so that will be my first advice to those leaders.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think is good advice. They're just juggling so much at that time. It is a lot that they take on, and they need that support to get clarity, to discern the next step. Thank you so much, Navid. This has been a wonderful conversation, and you've given an insight into what happens when big stake transitions are in play. So, thank you so much for your
Thank you,
time.
Rina, for
Yeah.
providing an opportunity, and all the best.